this session of completion, see that showing up so that we can actually provide that after the fact as well. So Jennifer, without further ado, I'm going to mute myself. Alfonso and I and Brandon will monitor the chat and be active there. But now the floor is yours. And once again, we are grateful to have you here.
Great. Thanks so much. And good evening, everyone. As Tim said, I'm a professor of English at California State University, Monterey Bay. I work with first-year college students and future teachers. And before my current job, I was a high school English teacher and department chair, and I taught classes like AVID, AP Lit, AP Lang, and a bunch of others. I'm going to start sharing my screen here, and I'm going to be talking tonight about transfer of learning, and I want to share a little more with you about my bio and let you know who I am, since kind of my background is itself the story of the benefits of integrative thinking. Okay, so everyone's seeing the slides? We're good? I'm looking to Tim and Alfonso for a heads up. You can see, perfect. So I kind of think of myself now as a co-author. For many years, I was a teacher at Buena Park High School in Southern California, and I'm now a Cal State Monterey Bay author. And I still feel like I'm very much a part of both worlds. My decade at Buena Park profoundly shaped who I am as a teacher and a person. And I sometimes think of CSUMB as kind of like BPHS, the remix. We are a small university. We serve a similar population to the students that I worked with in SoCal. Half of our students are first-gen college students. We have a 27-to-1 student to faculty ratio, which is kind of amazing and really wonderful for a four-year comprehensive university. And we're a Hispanic serving institution. So, you know, that diversity and focus on teaching and learning that I enjoyed at BPHS, I also enjoy now at CSUMB. And by the way, if there are any avid teachers out there, because of that really small student to teacher ratio, you might want to consider CSUMB as a good fit for your avid students. So I have to say too, that big transitions are not easy for me. I'm a pretty introverted person. So facing new situations is a challenge, and I like stability. I've been married to my high school sweetheart for almost 30 years now, but I believe in the value of teaching for change. And I've benefited tremendously from being able to bridge these different experiences in my life, and I want the same for my students. So, let's start by thinking about what we all want for our students. Sure, we want them to pass the big tests, we want them to succeed in our classes, but at a deeper level, I think we also want these things: the skills, knowledge, and habits of mind that lead to post-secondary success. And in terms of writing, especially, that ability to go into any situation and produce a text that works for that situation. And this, I should kind of tip my hand here and tell you, like, this is the what's in it for you kind of statement about the session tonight. What I want to offer you are ways to support your students in becoming adaptive, independent problem solvers and effective communicators, and people who feel like they can, that they're capable of tackling any new challenge that comes their way. Take a moment and read this slide, and then we'll talk. Okay, and feel free to share reactions in the chat as well. But this point about caring for houseplants is another way of articulating the goal I'm pursuing. You know, I want to support students in becoming the kind of person who can figure out how a system works, and in particular, like systems of oral and written communication, and then experiment within those systems. And I know that that's a big part of what's happening in AP Lang and AP Lit courses. Let's look now at where a lot of our students are starting from. This is a reflection that one of my students wrote describing her process for writing a grant proposal for the very first time. This was a totally new kind of task for her. And this is what she says, that it's been hard to figure out how to even start because I don't want to answer it incorrectly and have to redo it. And you can see, you know, she's worried about getting it wrong. She's worried about like being inefficient and going through that trial and error kind of process that, you know, we engage with as writers. And she's struggling with just even how to start. And I wanted to share this reflection because this is what that learning continuum looks like. You know, most of my own writing projects start with unmitigated cluelessness. Part of what I'm trying to do is change students' expectations around novelty. Not knowing what to do doesn't mean that something's wrong. It means that you have a problem to solve. So you activate the procedural and conceptual knowledge you rely on to solve problems. And if the problem is a rhetorical problem, a communication problem, then you brainstorm everything that you know about effective communication in different situations to produce a solution for this particular case. So I try to share with my students that being confused doesn't necessarily mean that like the teacher didn't give you clear enough directions or an outline or a template to follow. There are lots of real world writing situations, you know, in which the default starting place is confusion and frustration. So these are the big ideas that I want to share in this session. The more choices students make as writers, the more rhetorical knowledge they build. Rhetorical knowledge helps students compose diverse texts across diverse contexts. And reading and composing rhetorically prepares students to transfer learning to new situations. So choices, rhetorical knowledge, and transfer. I'm going to ask you to kind of hold on to those ideas for now. What we're going to do next is try out some low stakes ways to engage, to introduce students to rhetorical thinking. So first, let's go shopping. Imagine you've moved into a new space and you're looking at a blank wall and you want some art for this space. This could be a bedroom or a living room or a home office. And think like, how do we choose certain things for certain environments? So let's say you go to a bunch of like art galleries or, you know, home decor stores, and that these are the choices that you've narrowed down as your finalists. Which one do you pick? So take a moment to look, and when you're ready, go ahead. Actually, no, just think. I'm going to give you another slide for the direction, but jot down just the letter of your choice. And I won't be giving you any other directions. This is all you have to go on. You've got a blank wall in your home. You picture the room, and you choose one of these works of art. Just note the letter right now. Okay, we ready? So now I'm going to ask you to share in the chat. First, which work of art would you choose? Share the letter of your choice. What purpose would this work serve in the space? Jot down just a few ideas in the chat. It can be brief, just a phrase. or a couple words. And then what was your criteria for selecting an image? And again, this can be brief. Okay, let me take you back to the images so that you can see those. And I'm going to look in the chat. So again, it was your choice, your purpose, and your criteria. Okay, I'm seeing color, subject, something pretty. There's a lot on color. There's a lot on like the emotional response, calm, happy. Space, the subject matter for some people, the mood, soothing and peaceful, thought-provoking. So thank you. You know, what we can do from this is extract some principles, you know, about like this particular, like making decisions in response to a particular situation, like how the effects of a text, in this case, a visual text, depend on a particular audience, you know, you, and context, or a principle like how purpose shapes the choices that we make. You know, you choose the art depending on what it is you're going for. So we're going to change the context. Think about that same process that you used. Think about those principles that you can extract about making choices. And this time, we're going to transfer that thinking to a new context. A big idea in rhetorical thinking, of course, is that different contexts mean different choices. What works for one situation might not work for another. And so this time, you're going to be choosing art for someone else. And this art is going to be displayed in a public space, not in a private home. This time, imagine that you work for a hospital and you need to choose a piece of art for the hospital waiting room. Okay, you got it? That's the scenario. So think about your questions. Take a look at these. You have questions about purpose and audience and effect again, right? And now let's say that these are your choices. So once again, which one would you choose for that hospital waiting room? And why? And then when you're ready, go ahead and post in the chat. Okay, so this time, can I ask Alfonso or Tim or Brandon, what are you noticing in the chat? Are there any trends?
Hard to tell because they are coming fast and furious, which is awesome. The things I'm picking up though, I mean, these are, I mean, just some insights in and of themselves, and a lot of comments about application of all of these things. So it's just
One of the things.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, Alfonso. One of the things that I am noticing, though, as they are flying in, is the idea of the serenity and comfort that's needed in the waiting room or in the hospital setting. So A and C and B are the ones that are seemingly getting the most attention.
So Tim, those might be responding to like how, who comes to a hospital, under what circumstances, how are those people feeling, like what are their cares, concerns, and needs?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Anything else that people are noticing? How about like which paintings would you not choose? Either post in the chat or any of the moderators, if you want to jump in, what seems like that's probably not the best option for this context?
Some individuals are just mentioning about, the baby being in the picture might not be the most appropriate item, depending on what type of hospital area they are in, or hospital wing, depending on what's actually happening there.
Yeah, like who's the patient? If you are waiting for your child who's having surgery, this image might not help you to be calm and be comforted. Any other observations? We've got a lightning storm. We have a volcano erupting. So that could be an interesting choice. And, with all of this kind of work, we're doing a rhetorical analysis here, right? There isn't an answer key. There isn't like a right answer. I mean, if there is an answer, the answer is always, it depends, right? It depends on your purpose, your audience, your context. And you're not going to meet everybody's needs in the same way in this kind of a public space. One of these paintings serves as a real world example of how to respond to this particular scenario. That painting B, it's titled Fog, and it's by artist Enid Ryce. That actually was commissioned for Natividad Hospital in Salinas, California, near where I live. If you live in another part of the country or part of the world, and people are from all over tonight, which is really great, you might recognize Salinas as the birthplace of John Steinbeck, in the Salinas Valley as the setting for novels like East of Eden and Of Mice and Men. Salinas is known as the salad bowl of the world because of its agricultural importance. And so this piece was site specific, and these kinds of rhetorical questions we've been asking could be adapted for this particular community. I'm going to share with you what the hospital staff said about how they make decisions about things like art and decor in their public spaces. And so this was an article from the Monterey County Weekly, which is one of our local papers. And the hospital staff said that, we choose colors according to color psychology. In the waiting area for surgery patients, it's calming colors like greens and blues. And then I want to share too how the artist Enid Ryce models rhetorical thinking and what she says in an interview on this piece. So take a listen.
What I hope different viewers will feel when they see the work is I hope they'll feel cared about and cared for, whether they're a patient at the hospital who's waiting for an appointment, or a loved one who is there to support a patient, or who is taking some time to reflect, or if they're a worker at the hospital who has to sometimes deal with difficult situations, that the artwork is a peaceful space for them to feel nourished by the color and light in the works. The question is, what problem or need do I see the artwork addressing? And I came to this project right after spending a lot of time with my mother while she was in the hospital and she was dying. And the hospital did not have any artwork on the walls or any peaceful spaces for me to take a moment and walk or try to gather my thoughts or process what was happening. So when I had the opportunity to create something loving and site-specific and celebrating Salinas and creating a space for people at the hospital to feel cared for, I was excited to have that opportunity. I hope that it helps.
So Ryce notes that visual rhetoric creates effects in and on the world. And I really appreciate her comments too about how complex these communication contexts are, all the different people in all these different roles, and even in kind of different moments of their daily lives, how they might interact with text in these spaces. I want to make the point now too about this process for analyzing visual texts translates to our work with other kinds of text. So like a newspaper article, or like a poem, or like a book. And that's because this process is adaptive by its very nature. The process of rhetorical decision-making is, it runs on situational awareness and responsiveness. So when we're doing this kind of work, we're analyzing the rhetorical situation. We're discovering the best available means of communication. You might recognize, of course, Aristotle talks about means of persuasion. I think we can broaden that. And then we're making choices about audience purpose, genre, language, structure, all of those things. And by the way, we can think about a rhetorical situation as a situation that can be changed by rhetorical action. So, the paintings are changing potentially how people feel as they are in that space. Another way of saying this is that we are doing things with texts to create particular effects. This is what educational researcher Bill Green says about rhetoric in his book, Engaging Curriculum. By rhetoric, I mean doing things with text, increasingly multimodal text. And this involves self-consciously working with texts of all kinds to create effects in and on the world. That deliberate and self-conscious work with text is what helps students to activate their own process for responding effectively when faced with an unfamiliar literacy task. That whole anxiety around, like, I've never done this before and I don't know where to start. You don't have to know rules and formulas for writing if you understand how the system works and can experiment within the system. So rhetoric really becomes this meta discipline with tremendously broad applications. Literary critic Terry Eagleton says that rhetoric's horizon was nothing less than the field of discursive practices in society as a whole. And its particular interest lay in grasping such practices as forms of power and performance. And so this means that all kinds of texts, right? From targeted ads and social media feeds to tweets to paintings can be studied rhetorically. And we can use a rhetorical approach to different texts to talk about the social and ideological work that texts do. So for example, in your own classes, you could have students do things with multimodal texts through this kind of activity. Go ahead and take a quick look at the directions, and I'll just share. This is something that I might do with my own students to help them adapt and apply their learning and kind of build on their rhetorical knowledge after doing those kinds of low stakes activities with the painting. So take a moment and just look at those directions, please. And I want to remind you that I'll post the slides on my blog, rhetoricalthinking.com. I think that link is already in the chat. So if you don't capture something as we're going through, you'll have access to the resources on the blog. But you're noticing maybe like a couple different ways that students are having to repurpose their rhetorical knowledge, right? They're being kind of producers of text here rather than consumers of text. We're seeing some of those same key concepts, but we're seeing them in a new way. And this is one of the ways that we teach for transfer, by supporting students in that process of rhetorical decision making. Transfer is the ultimate measure of depth of understanding. In the new book, Teaching for Transfer, and I have to hold up my copy here because I'm a huge fan of this book. I have to say I was really excited when I saw it come out, because a lot of what I've read on Teaching for Transfer, and I write about Teaching for Transfer, comes from researchers and teachers in higher ed. And this is a book specifically for K-12 educators. So Julie Stearns and her co-authors write that the ability to transfer understanding to new situations is a hallmark of expertise in any field. And we should be teaching in ways that cultivate expert learners, and that move students along that continuum from novice to expert. Novices do things differently from experts, right? Novices depend on rules and formulas. They substitute easier tasks for more complex ones. They often need step-by-step instructions, and they'll use mimicry as a coping strategy. And this is kind of my synthesis of work from people like Meyer and Land and Benner or the National Research Council. And this is not to say that what novices do is wrong. Right? We can't avoid starting as novices, but we should be teaching toward expertise rather than teaching in a way that kind of locks students into perpetual novice status. So experts, in contrast, will retrieve learning relevant to a particular task or context, draw on deep procedural and conceptual knowledge to respond to unfamiliar situations rather than kind of waiting for someone else to tell them what to do, will practice independent problem solving, and adapt and transform learning for new purposes. And that adapt and transform is like my working definition of transfer. Transfer doesn't just mean you keep using something again. It means that you keep changing it up. You keep remixing it as needed and relevant. So I want to just zoom in on these characteristics of experts as kind of a vision for student success, right? This idea of retrieving learning relevant to a particular context. How do students know what's relevant, right? They ask those questions about like audience, purpose, and genre and context. Practice independent problem solving. How do we get to independence? We know how to experiment. We can do that trial and error. Adapt and transform learning for new purposes. So we leverage our resources. We kind of take stock of our assets and think, I already know this process. I already know these big concepts. Let's see if they apply in this new scenario. So I want to share another idea I think is really important from learning that transfers. And this is that idea of the iterative nature, or that kind of spiraling nature of teaching for transfer. So Stearns and her co-authors say something else I think is very significant, that the act of connecting and transferring our understanding of concepts to new situations serves as a way to practice and apply what we've learned over time. And of course, that's what we've been doing in this session, right? We've been spiraling through a few kind of related scenarios. Some elements are the same, some are different, moving from a home to a hospital, from private to public, from kind of consumer to producer. When we do things like this, that's when we're building students' capacity for that independent problem solving. And this is why I'm so drawn to the research on transfer. If we can help students get better at preparing them to adapt to change, then we're helping them to thrive across multiple contexts of their lives: situational, cultural, personal, temporal, and all of that really exciting uncertainty. And that the concept that we've been applying across contexts in this session is that high utility concept of the rhetorical situation. We're also going to do a different kind of transfer right now. So we're going to go from visual text to a verbal text. This is a poem written by one of my students. I'll tell you a story about that in just a moment. And we're also moving from reading to composing. We've been kind of analyzing works created by other people for the most part, and we'll now take a look at a student assignment that asks them to compose rhetorically. So one of the assignments that I now have in my class for first-year college students is to submit a piece for publication consideration. I have a brilliant colleague, Dr. Kelly Medina Lopez, who founded a student journal. This is Writing Waves, it's published through Digital Commons, and it has become the reader for many of our freshman comp classes. It is edited by students, and it provides a fantastic opportunity for students to repurpose some of their work that they've done just for a class for a new use. So these are my directions for that culminating task. Take just a minute to skim these. So you can see what I'm asking students to do is to revise an earlier work. But this time they're taking that work out of our freshman comp class and hopefully sharing it with the university community as a whole through this publication. And they're writing, if I go back here, you can see that this work is going to be evaluated by their peers, by student editors, not by me as the teacher. And it sparks some really transformative learning and interesting conversations because, students' drafts, when they write for my class, they might, open with saying, oh, when we, read that piece by Ta-Nehisi Coates, or, when we talked in class about this issue, the journal is typically published, through a multi-month process. So students maybe wrote something in September for me. They submit it to the editors in January, gets kicked back to the students for revision and resubmission. The editors finally say, okay, now we're ready to go to typesetting and proofreading. And then the journal might not be published until May or June. And so, it's going out to people and will be read in next year's freshman comp classes by readers who don't know what you did in your freshman comp class. How are you going to change that piece up so that a new audience understands it? It's a really kind of powerful reimagining that they have to do of the reader experience. So what students learn from this is that it's probably a lot more exciting to write for their peers than to just write for an instructor. One of my students, Navreen, wrote an absolutely brilliant set of paired poems, and her piece was selected for publication. And you can see, this is journal format. So she's getting a lot of new genre knowledge that I didn't provide in the class about, providing keywords and what that formatting is going to look like. And in her reflection, she talked about, this was a mind-blowing experience, having her work published for her peers, and she wants to keep doing it. So, that's the kind of thing that, makes my day as a teacher. So I want to remind you again of that vision of experts. If we're teaching on that continuum from novice to experts, we want to help students develop deep procedural and conceptual knowledge that helps them respond to unfamiliar situations, and practice independent problem solving. And so we can do that by scaffolding the process rather than the product. And that means we're thinking about the concepts we want to teach and the inquiry and writing processes that we're trying to teach. And so if you think about what a product-based scaffold might look like, it's going to have a lot of those same features as like what novices do with text, right? Maybe focus more on the surface features of like whatever the essay is. It has to have these many paragraphs, topic sentences go here, 2 quotes per body paragraph, prioritizes form over principle or function. So it doesn't necessarily dig into why it looks the way it looks, but just focus is more on like copy this format. Trains students to replicate a predetermined form. So somebody else has already made the choices about genre and structure, and it's about learning those kinds of compulsory moves. And then values efficiency over uniformity. It's a way to kind of speed up the appearance of proficiency. And I'll show you an example of what I would say is probably a product-based scaffold. Process-based scaffolds, on the other hand, support authentic inquiry. So that really messy, confusing work of writing something you've never written before. Where do you start? What's the process you enact? Models the practices of experts, guides students in making principled choices about both process and product. So they've got those underlying principles about, oh, you know, what's effective depends on the situation. That's a principle. And then values autonomy and independent problem solving. So I would say this is an example of a product-based scaffold. It's focusing on the surface features of what this kind of essay looks like. The choices have already been made for students, and the task is for students to just kind of fill in the blank, but not really dig into like, why have a counter argument? Or how do you move students through a line of reasoning? And what are readers' expectations about the argument that you're developing? In contrast to that, I want to share a scaffold for that focuses on process. And this is an exercise that I use with my students for making choices about audience and genre in response to a particular topic and rhetorical situation. So let's say we've chosen the topic of student debt, and we've been reading articles together. And then I brainstorm with students, okay, if the problem you want to address, the question at issue, is what should we do to reduce student debt? Who are the people who have the power to make a change? Colleges, parents, students, legislators, etc. And then think about the best way to reach these people. So now we're getting into genre. Do we write an email? Do we put together an ad campaign? Do we staff a phone bank and make phone calls? Do we do an open letter or an op-ed letter? Do we send out some tweets and at the people that we want to influence? Do we write a petition or a position statement? And so what's happening here, and you'll find this graphic organizer in, you'll find it in Writing Rhetorically, which is my book that just came out, as you heard, but Stenhouse also makes free downloadable PDFs available of the appendices in my books. And so this is one that's going to be available on Stenhouse's site, and I'll show you where it is. But it goes step by step through a process that supports students in making their own choices. And this becomes that transferable procedural knowledge that can help students in responding to unfamiliar literacy tasks. So the last thing I want to do before we go into like Q&A is zoom in a little bit more on why genre knowledge is a particularly important part of rhetorical knowledge that helps novices progress along that continuum toward greater expertise. Carolyn Miller talks about a genre as a typified response to a recurrent rhetorical situation. So it's a situation that keeps happening, but it's going to keep happening with a difference, and it could stop happening. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we don't teach about genre enough, is that genres change and genres disappear, right? There are no more op-ed letters in the New York Times, right? New York Times has eliminated that term. I think they're now essays, opinion essays, something, because the medium has changed. So again, it's the questions that I think have the highest transfer value, rather than like teaching, this is what a podcast looks like, or this is what an open letter looks like. How do you help students enact the process where they can figure out for themselves how to figure out how to communicate in different situations? And so let's say this is the example of the brainstorm that I went through. Let's say we go through that process together. We land on email. Okay, you want to write an email to a legislator about the high cost of college. How do you do that? Here's what one of my students wrote. Take a moment and look at this and see if you can notice evidence of the students developing genre knowledge. Okay, and feel free to share in the chat, or moderators, if you see anything. Are there any places that suggest to you, okay, this is a student who is learning how to analyze genres in preparation for responding to a rhetorical situation? And let me know if there's anything in the chat.
Jennifer, I missed that question. I'm sorry. I was just responding to one of the comments in the chat. Can you ask that again?
Yeah, do you see any evidence in this student reflection that the student is learning how to analyze genres in preparation for responding to a rhetorical situation? Where's that? Is there any evidence of kind of genre awareness and genre analysis going on?
Well, the student's certainly looking for a mentor text and discussing the vocabulary that is presumably in an email that is weighty like this.
Yeah, we've got some considerations of language. Of course, the tricky thing here is that, if it's not a public email, how do you find a mentor text? And so that's one of the things to like be really candid about with students, is that you won't always be able to find a mentor text that like aligns with your situation, but there will be other clues in the rhetorical situation that can guide you in your response. Mentor texts are still like my go-to resource for helping students develop genre awareness. I'm sure many of you know Allison Marchetti's and Rebecca Odell's fantastic work with mentor texts, and they make this point about how working with mentor texts enables independence, because it's inquiry based, right? It's not the teacher telling students what they have to write. It's students learning from mentor texts, what many of their options are for writing. You might know too, I have to share another of my summer reads. They have a new book, A Teacher's Guide to Mentor Texts, that I think is really helpful, because it helps students think about, yay, more fans, like it helps them develop a theory of writing, because students are, as they're analyzing the mentor text, they're thinking about why the writers made the choices that they did. And anytime you're digging into those underlying principles, that's building expertise. And so this is an activity that I share in Teaching Literature Rhetorically, and you'll also find it for free on Stenhouse's website, and I'll show you where you can get it. You'll find it for free on my blog too. It's just the genre feature analysis matrix. And so students collect a set of mentor texts, So let's say, this is an example. I know it's from one of their books, author bios. Let's say a bunch of bios for like young adult novelists. And so for each one of those meta texts, they write the title, and then they check off the boxes like, am I seeing this kind of language or organization or other special features? And they get a snapshot of some of the features and functions of that particular genre. But I think it's really important that it stays inquiry-based and process-based, because of that other principle that language changes, genres come and go. It's much more valuable to be able to figure out how a genre does its work than to memorize like what just for today the genre is. So the big ideas that I wanted to share with you tonight were these: that the more choices students make as writers, the more rhetorical knowledge they build, that rhetorical knowledge helps students compose diverse texts across diverse contexts, and that all of this helps to facilitate transfer of learning. I want to take a few minutes for Q&A, and then I'll wrap up by sharing where you can go for resources and a final thought. So Tim, I look to you. How do you want to do
Yeah, so what we're
Q&A?
going to do, first of all, I want to just let you know that I'm seeing in the comments here that you're encouraging a lot of English teachers to become even more book poor tonight, which I don't think that's the worst thing, to be honest with you, as we work to perfect what we do. But yeah, we will take some questions here. So if you have questions about this idea of teaching for transfer and whatnot, if you want to just raise your hand, that little reactions icon at the bottom of your Zoom, if you click in there, you'll see a little raise hand button, and that will actually jump you right up to the top. And if that happens, I will be able to click on your name and ask you to unmute, and then you can ask the question. I would also encourage people to put some questions in the chat, but Jennifer, all night, this chat has been just like, when you've said, hey, put this in the chat, things have just been flying through. So just bear with me as I try to monitor that. It'll be much easier if people raise their hands, but
well, Tim, too, while people raise their hands, I think it might be a good idea. A lot of people have asked where, and I know Alfonso has been posting the link. I think a lot of people have been asking where they can get Jennifer's presentation and where this recording will be posted. Do you want to repost that? Yeah, Alfonso just reposted it there at rhetoricalthinking.com.
Yep. And I think it'll also be on aplithelp.com as well.
That's right. Alfonso just posted that too.
Okay.
And Jennifer, is there a way you could list off all of the books? Because I've got people asking, what was the first book? What was the last book? I think they just had trouble keeping track of all of them. They were so excited at the wealth of resources. There you go.
Yeah,
Just like any good presenter or researcher,
citations.
she has a works cited page.
But these are the two that I've been, just really obsessed with this summer. But yeah, and then some of those old standards like the Terry Eagleton.
And I dropped the links, the Amazon links to those two texts in the chat. If you guys want to scroll up and find those, and if you find the recording on AP Lit Help, you'll also get a transcript of the chat too. So. Go ahead, Tim, with any questions. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's perfectly fine. I appreciate you noticing that also in the chat. That is one that zoomed by me here. So one of the questions that just showed up, yeah, can you have a copy of this presentation? Yes, the presentation is made public. We've already posted the links for that. So just want to go to Jennifer's blog or aplithelp.com. Let me see if I have any other questions in here.
I have a question while you look for him, Tim.
Yep.
And Jennifer, I really, can you say some more about the link between failure and taking risks and transfer? I think that was something that a lot of people had a lot of excited comments about. And I know that's something that we get a lot of questions about when we are talking about challenging students.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the question that's guiding a lot of my thinking and learning as a teacher right now. And as a parent too, I don't know if I mentioned, so my daughter's going to be an 11th grader this fall. My son's going to be a 12th grader. What I'm asking you to try, and what I'm trying is like not efficient. It's taking out some of those shortcuts that kind of produce the illusion of proficiency that don't really get students to that deeper learning. That, like, when we think about expertise, those characteristics of expertise again, where students are, you know things deeply when you've gone through trial and error, when you've, we kind of learn like how the whole thing works, like we get under the hood of the system and get into all those little random corners, like through problem solving. I'm a big fan of the engineering design process too, because that allows for so much like prototype development and evaluation of like what worked and what didn't work. And that's that kind of deep procedural and conceptual knowledge, like through failure, that whole idea of fail forward, right? And it's like, doing things like writing for publication or writing grants. Like oftentimes you don't know what works until you get that first rejection letter, but hopefully it comes with some feedback that's going to give you, a better shot next time.
So I do have one question in the comment, in the comments here, and it is, hold on one second. Right. Sorry, Jennifer. And one of them is, how do you keep kids from using mentor text as a crutch as opposed to a way to facilitate that kind of guided learning that they're trying to do?
I think a starting place is to situate mentor texts within specific contexts, and to do that kind of analysis of the rhetorical situation of the mentor text. And so, if you think about the word like mentor, to what extent can this text help you and serve as a mentor? What you're having to do is compare and contrast your context with the context of the mentor text. And that's another big part of transfer. And the connections between rhetorical thinking and transfer of learning, are many, because both are about like leveraging your resources to adapt to a new situation. So to figure out what is appropriate in that new situation, you have to find the similarities and the differences. And that's what I think, keeps students from just like, oh, this writer did this, so I'm going to copy it exactly the same way. If they can dig into why the writer did that in response to particular audience purpose, genre, etc., I think that's where we're moving them toward independence, and not to just like another, here's a cool hack for writing.
All right, I'm going to scour this chat just a little bit more here, see if there are any other questions there. By all means, folks, if you are able and willing, please raise your hand if you have a question for Jennifer. One of the things
it seemed like there were a few people coming off mute, and you all, it would be much easier if you just click the reactions at the bottom and raise your hands.
Yeah.
That'll notify us, and it's much easier for us to manage when we have 325 people in the meeting. Thank you.
Absolutely. One of the things that I like to do with my students is, before I get them thinking about a particular text that we're going to look at, is I give them this kind of fictional situation where they have to make the choices themselves with a different audience that's going to relate thematically. And then I'm like, hey, tell me why you made the choices that you did. Trying to get them engaged, or, a lot of times I just talk to them about, like, how they talk to their grandparents at the local, at the holiday season. And then when they go and hang out with their cousins down in the basement, how the language all of a sudden changes awfully quickly. And it's like, why? Well, why is that? You're just trying to engage kids in that way to get them to realize that they already think like this. A lot of times they already transfer a lot of this knowledge. We just have to get them to think about it. That like, oh, hey, we can apply this in school too. And for some reason, it seems like there's a disconnect there.
Yeah,
we
well,
do
I
have
think
a
it goes
hand
back to
up
the
there.
failure. Yeah.
So, sorry, we do have a hand up there, and we are right at the top of the hour. Jennifer, go ahead, and then we'll go to Leanna for her question.
Oh, I think that fear of failure and of, some of those kind of rule-based formulaic approaches to teaching is why students they're not transferring, right? They're afraid to do what they already do because they might be told that's wrong.
Absolutely. All right.
Leanna, go ahead with your question.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My question is sort of a reiteration of someone else's thoughts and that posted earlier, and it's how do we meaningfully teach them to do in 40-45 minutes this depth of connectedness and interconnectedness that we want for them. We want them to struggle. We want them to do that. But how can we validate that process on a 45-minute test or whatever? And this is my first year teaching this, so, I don't know much.
Yeah, some of the most important questions that we can ask students are like, how do you know, and what did you do? That what did you do question. So to write a summary, what did you have to do to write a summary of, like the chapter you read or whatever it is, that operationalizing their knowledge. And, that you can do with, I've done it with like second graders summarizing, a short story that they heard. Like, how do you know what the main idea was? Oh, because that's the character, like that's the person that we like heard about the most. But that kind of metacognition, that's what builds the depth, and that's what facilitates transfer. I'll say too, I'll hold this up one more time. We've got great questions about just how is this concept related to that concept? How do ideas like audience and purpose interact? How do they impact each other? So it's not so much like the terms. I mean, you'll notice like I'm not saying ethos, pathos, and logos. I'm saying like what has transfer value are the concepts, the processes, and the questions that students ask about situations that help to enact those problem-solving processes.
And
I
Jennifer,
know-
if I may,
yeah.
if I may add, I think a lot of us who are, you having taught AP yourself, right, Jennifer, and been an AP reader, and I think I don't want to speak for Alfonso and Tim, so I invite them to step in on this. But those of us who are consultants would say that, yeah, you're teaching the students to have to be able to show that they could do that in the 40-45 minutes. But there's more to it in the class than that, so that you have this opportunity to teach them to be composers of long form text and different types of text in response to different situations. And so, yeah, we certainly do have, the cross that we bear with the test, but there's also writing beyond that too. Tim, Alfonso, would you all have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say,
ahead,
that,
Tim.
I teach the test essay as its own context. Like there are things that you look for, and that's the best, for me, that's just one of the contexts that I bring into my classroom, where it's like, you need to know there are going to be things that we're looking for. So let's do it, but also know that when we write our letter to the editor, it's going to look very, very different.
Yeah, I do think of the test as more of a constructive response than I do as a type of long form essay. Alfonso, I know sometimes I say that constructive response things and it makes people shiver a little bit. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think what we know, and we've talked about this quite a bit, the fact that the course is much larger than the exam. I think it's one way to think about it, right? The way we teach, and again, as Jennifer has been awesomely telling us a few ways to do this tonight, we think about the course to guide our students to get those skills, that knowledge, especially those habits of mind, right? To develop as readers, as thinkers, as writers. And then the exam is designed then to see what they can do in a limited time and space, right? So it's not about teaching them to do the exam. It's about teaching them the reading and the writing and the thinking skills so they can handle the exam, right? Adapt to that particular situation. So I think that's one of the main differences. So, I always tell my kids, yeah, you're also going to take an exam at the end of this, but that's not what the course is about.
All right, we are at the top of the hour, Jennifer. A little bit past that, actually. I want to thank you so much for your time. I'm going to actually share my screen for a moment, just so that we can give a showcase of what's coming forward or what's coming over this next week, right? So thank you once again, Jennifer, for joining us here. Tomorrow night, we actually have a presentation about gifted and talented classes. That's not yet. That's not your classroom yet. And Emily and Tim will be giving that to us, and you'll actually have me back tomorrow night, actually being the person that hosts that. And then the AP literature session, which happens right after, with a good friend of mine named Gina Cordum, is a mixed media approach to AP Lit. And I hope that you will consider joining us for such times. Next Sunday, we have an interesting kind of keynote here where it's actually going to be a moderated panel. So Dixie Ross, who I think actually teaches AP Computer Science, if I remember correctly, is going to work to give students a voice and seat at our Zoom table here for Mosaic. So we're going to be able to hear from them. So we've got that to look forward to as our time goes on. So once again, being at the actually after the top of the hour, we're going to thank everybody for joining us here tonight. Again, thank you very much, Jennifer. I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll keep this open for a little while. Jennifer, if you want to hang around, you don't have to if you don't want to, though. But it was nice to see you all, and I hope you all have a great night.
Thanks so much, everyone.